This spotlight for Black History Month is all on Fannie Lou Hamer. And honestly, her work is more important now than ever because she was very unlikely to be someone who went down in history. But she was willing to stand up for what was right. She thought that all people should be able to vote, not just some, and she worked tirelessly to make that happen. She said, "When I liberate myself, I liberate others. If you don't speak out, ain't nobody gonna speak out for you." She got that voting was a right, not a privilege. She was born in 1917, the 20th child of a sharecropping family in Mississippi. Since sharecropping was designed to keep people poor, by age 6, Fannie Lou was expected to be in the fields picking cotton. And by age 12, she really didn't have much of a choice but to leave school so that she could work pretty much full time and help support her family. With her limited education, she did learn how to read and write, so she was able to be a bookkeeper when she got a little bit older, working on a different plantation. She got married, and as young couples do, they wanted to start a family. But unfortunately, when Fannie Lou went to a white doctor, she was given a hysterectomy without her consent. So the doctor said it was to remove a uterine tumor, but honestly, that was something that happened pretty common in rural areas of the Deep South because they were trying to use it as a method of population control. She and her husband did go on to adopt 2 daughters, and she wanted to fight for her daughters to have more freedoms than she did. And so she became very invested in the civil rights movement. In 1962, Fannie Lou decided that she wanted to register to vote. However, she was denied on the basis that she failed a literacy test. She knew how to read and write, but those tests were notoriously racist and they were very subjective, making them pretty much impossible to pass unless the examiner wanted you to. She was forced to wait 30 days to try again, and she came back. She was told she failed again. And she told the registrar essentially, "I'm going to come back every 30 days until you let me pass." After that point, she did pass that test and became a voter in the state of Mississippi on paper. However, when she tried to vote in the next election, she was told that she was not allowed to vote because in addition to that literacy test, she also needed to have proof of 2 poll tax receipts that she wouldn't have had because she had not been allowed to vote before then. Unfortunately, this time it was super common and unfortunately still legal for literacy tests and poll taxes to be requirements for voting, disenfranchising Black voters because white voters didn't have to meet those same requirements because of the grandfather clause, which basically had said that if your grandfather could vote before the Civil War, then you'd be able to vote no problems. This was something that was put into place around the time of Reconstruction so that poor white people who could not read and write at very similar rates to African American people would be able to vote and feel like they were different from the African American folks around them. After this, Fannie Lou became even more determined in her campaign for civil rights. She became a speaker at several organizations trying to inform folks how to fight for their rights, and she traveled around to different rural areas with petitions trying to change the way that Mississippi did their voting laws. The more people she met, the more people Fannie Lou had just had too much. She said, "We've been waiting all our lives and still getting killed, still getting hung, still getting beat to death. Now we're tired of waiting." The deeper she got into politics, the harsher her life became in Mississippi and the life of her husband and children. Because of her attempts at voting, she was fired by her boss, but her husband wasn't allowed to quit. He was tied to the sharecropping agreement and they wouldn't let him leave, so they couldn't move away to find other jobs. She was targeted by the KKK. She was shot at in a drive-by shooting. And so she was putting a lot at risk to do this, but she felt like it was the right thing to do, and so she was not going to stop. In 1963, when she was heading to speak at a conference in Charleston, South Carolina, she and the group she were with were stopped by the police in a little town in Mississippi, and essentially they were arrested for being Black. The group was beaten, and the women were assaulted. Some of the men were beaten so severely their eyes were swollen shut. The group was released 3 days later, but Hamer was permanently injured from the extent of the beatings. She had a blood clot over one of her eyes, and one of her kidneys never worked properly after that. But she didn't let that stop her. She continued across Mississippi to organize voter registration drives, and was one of the driving forces for the 1963 Freedom Ballot and Freedom Summer initiatives. She continued to fight racist policies in the Democratic Party and spoke at the Democratic National Convention in 1964, which was instrumental in the passing of the Voting Rights Act. She continued to speak out for equality until she passed in 1970.